In the previous video, we had some viewer questions, and in this video, we will answer those questions, and they are related to the purportedly serious unanswered questions regarding DNA research that some have claimed and insisted disprove the Mormon religion. So we'll see what was asked here. First viewer question is this. What's puzzling is that current DNA testing shows that Native Americans are related to Asians rather than to Jews. Do Asians come from Joseph? So, of course, the motivation for asking the questions is not clear on all of these questions. Are they innocent questions from someone a little bit confused, or are they meant to be leading questions that are not possible to answer? So we're going to take a shot at it, though. So the answer is that a lot of DNA shows the races have intermingled. So there is DNA represented from Joseph in Asia. Although the science has not provided us with enough data to understand the specifics of which DNA is definitely from and which DNA is not, or speculated to be from the lines of Joseph. Okay, so when we're talking about Asia and America, of course, the key component here is the Bering Strait. Now, is that a significant obstacle to cross from one continent to the other? You see those two islands in the center of it, and you see Asia on the left, the west, and you see America on the right. Those islands you see in the middle are the Diomede Islands. The second question, we're just going to go ahead and go through the questions, and then we'll give more details to the answers here as this video proceeds. Number 2, how can Joseph and Judah have different DNA when they both have the same father, Jacob, whose name was changed by God from Jacob to Israel? And of course, question number 3, would it matter that Jacob's children came from 4 different women/wives? Okay, the question is arising from the questions, why are these worthy of asked? So let's talk about question 3. Would it matter that Jacob's children came from 4 different women/wives? The answer, well, this may be that the viewer is lost in the limitations others have created for him in his own mind. That's the best educated guess we can come up with, because would it matter, and for what would it matter? What, you haven't clarified why you're asking the question. So perhaps the point does need clarification as to why you are asking this question and what exactly is the context that you mean. Of course, I think it's obvious. Jacob's grandchildren through any of the 4 wives would definitely have his DNA represented. Has anyone said any different than this? Who would be claiming that, when, and where? And it kind of comes, let's just say the conundrum, for lack of a better word, faced by those individuals hung up on the DNA research in their discussions when they try to figure out the Mormon religion. And the observation would be, this question asks about the possibility of one generation losing DNA similarities right after asserting there is proof of pinpoint research going back in thousands of years. I apologize for the mistyped word there. Premises of DNA research, parameters you must accept in order to go where that is going to go and answer those questions. And let's just say, wow, those are great questions. Now we're confused. Well, so we're going to have to assume that the current identified DNA samples by race have not had significant changes since the time of Scripture. We're just saying, hey, you found a great representation of Jews that's the same now as it was 2,500 years ago, for example. You must assume, sedentary existence of groups of people for thousands of years. Meaning travel over the centuries and intermingling of DNA of races. So you're assuming we can come up with a DNA sample today that very much represents the DNA of the time when Lehi's family left Israel and traveled to South America. The next assumption or premise you must have is one example of the above premise is that people inhabiting the lands of the Bering Straits for centuries were not intelligent enough to travel back and forth between the continents of Asia and North America. Now, if they can come from Asia to North America, and it's only 52 miles in each direction, the question is, why would they only be allowed to travel one direction from Asia to North America? And why would they not return to Asia from North America? Why would there not be crossings going each direction? And also that researchers were able to exclusively pinpoint very detailed genetic markings of Jewish DNA. DNA that has been able to remain isolated from other racial DNA markings, despite people of selected Jewish origin existing near other races of different DNA strands for thousands of years. Now, and this is leading us to ask just more questions as to why they were even posed in the first place. And are these actual questions that people are wrestling with, or what is the intent of asking the question? So we are going to proceed on the premise that there's a good reason to ask. Maybe there's just confusion that's reasonable confusion. So, is it possible for populations of two continents to mix? I don't think you're going to say no. Well, there's no doubt that Asians and Native Americans have intermingled over the thousands of years. But a more fascinating and overlooked aspect of this question, which can be framed in a perplexing manner based on what most people are taught and know, should be, how would it be conceivable Asians and Native Americans are not related in any way or significant way? And as you look at the maps and you look at the similarities between Siberia, Canada, and the American Southwest, for example, the Navajo tribe has tribes in Canada that speak very much like them, Siberia. So how would it be conceivable that we don't have some tie or relation there? And with the sketchy information base from which Jewish DNA is researched and determined, how is it possible, using select information centuries and even millenniums later, after the time of the Bible, that whatever research you see is accurate? So we haven't had anyone offer a specific study to look at. We're kind of accepting on blind faith. There's some great research out there that proves the absolute DNA of Jewish people that's infallibly been proven back over centuries and centuries, and it retains much of the same characteristics. If each of us were to trace our ancestry back 2,000 years, and for the sake of discussion, let's just pretend that none of our ancestors are related. We know that is impossible, but okay, here's the Bering Strait. There's the Diomede Islands. There's one on the Alaska side and one on the Russian territory. They're just 2.5 miles apart. And we'll get back to that in just a moment here. Now, of course, we've had questions like these come up over the last 20 years. We've actually seen LDS scholars reconsider their whole understanding of the Book of Mormon and trying to figure out how to make it all fit with the latest research fads. And so it is a bit bizarre that this has been going on in the LDS Church. There's a few questions we just need to keep asking. And if there is something valid out there and the reader perhaps will share it after watching this. If we were to trace our genealogy tree back, each one of us will find the unique slots of ancestors each of us have in our ancestral tree. Let's just say 2,000 years ago, that would number in the trillions. Now we can go back farther, and before you know it, you're in the quadrillions. And of course, you know, you're not able to go all the way back from the start of the Bible history. Book of Genesis is what I'm referring to. Have we ever had a huge amount of people on Earth? Well, no, of course not. So we can at least agree that in trying to pinpoint specific and preserve DN lines from the time of that first people of the Book of Mormon would be folly, would it not be? How can any of us prove that to be so? We had a good handle on categorizing the quadrillions of ancestral combinations. So, while we do know that you'd have to, marry your 10th cousin, and back when the population was not as big, you would have a group of people in a town, and you wouldn't want to marry your cousin, but you may end up finding people marry their 6th and 7th cousin back when there just wasn't enough of a population base. That would answer the trillions of combinations. But unless we have that kind of a good handle on categorizing quadrillions of ancestral combinations, and based on how accurate we are in tracing and preserving information, to verify a perfect DNA model from thousands of years ago, and this would include counting for those quadrillions of ancestral possibilities, not to mention categorizing the travel histories of people. Were they nomadic? Or did they stay in the same place? Were they always there over the centuries? And let's ask about the Bering Straits in that case. The people of Wales or the people on the other side. Were they simply confined to those areas? They were surely fishermen. Surely they took boats out into the water, maybe even a day's journey. If they came over for a day, they would see the other continent. And so we're trying to figure out why researchers assume that we have a rule that we can't cross Asia and America back and forth over this thousands of years. So there are even more numerous DNA possibilities from that time. Make sure that you are looking at DNA testing research that has a solid foundation of historic, accurate authenticity. So here we are. Of course, we all have the other part of North America, and we've heard from various historical sources that Greenland was attempted to be settled. It was warm at one point. Now it's frozen in so many places. You can see Iceland to Greenland. I mean, it looks close on the map. We realize that's quite a distance of hundreds and hundreds of miles, but we have had questions about how Europeans may have come into America through this route. And so, can we assume a sedentary existence of groups of people for thousands of years, though, which preserve very specific DNA characteristics? And so we're assuming there wasn't a lot of DNA mixing of races back a couple thousand years ago, several hundred years ago. How do we go back and figure out that history when we don't have eyewitness present there? So let's discuss the answer to question number 2 posed by the viewer. How can Joseph and Judah have different DNA when they both have the same father? Well, who said they had different DNA? So the answer would be, on what basis anyone allegedly tried to prove that Joseph and Judah have different DNA? Who is saying this? Is there something about the research that says, hey, you can't have different DNA, and someone claimed Joseph and Judah have different DNA? Well, anyway, you get lost in the brain gymnastics of that. course, it couldn't be a valid question unless someone is trying to pin something regarding some alleged fact that some group is claiming they have different DNA. So, does the question itself imply a foregone conclusion to blindly accept some source which asserts a claim of, let's just say, distinguishing DNA characteristics that contradicts something I allegedly said on my videos? And how would you prove those DNA similarities or difference thousands of years later? So it may just be a rhetorical question someone's asking, but we don't have all the information, all of the context that's in that person's mind that can be based on facts we all agree on. So I don't think that's a reasonable question. That's my answer. Let's talk about the Bering Strait traditional travel. The narrowest point of the Bering Strait, and having the distance between the continents of Asia to America, is about 82 kilometers, or 51 miles. I may have said 52 miles at its narrowest point. And we're talking Cape Dezhnev, the Chukchi Peninsula of Russia, traveling to Cape Prince of Wales, the United States. Now, in 1890, they were settling the area, and they changed it to an English name, but it's actually an Inuit settlement there, and it had been there for many years before they would have been able to categorize how long people have been in Wales. So in 1880, the U.S. Census put Wales in as an unincorporated Inuit village of Kingagamut, which would be strong evidence there is a history of habitation in that location which precedes hundreds of years of our known recorded history. So we're wondering how anyone could rule out that those indigenous populations of Cape Dezhnev and Wales were not aware that travel between the two continents in both directions was so simple. How would they be ignorant of that fact? They would surely be fishing, staying alive, moving around the area. It's bizarre that a lot of the DNA research insists that they could not have traveled from continent to continent. Or perhaps the only other alternative that these people can be explained by is they merely existed in a remote and cold location and somehow just survived that way, without possessing any drive or desire to venture out into the waters, just in case there was something on the other side. Is it reasonable to assume that and to believe that over the centuries, the colonies of people living in these areas of the Bering Strait were not adventurous at all to venture out into the waters? Is that not demeaning and degrading? If you're going to you're going to label a race of people as just not capable of traveling a day's boat journey away, to label the Inuits that they had no ingenuity or drive to determine what may have existed in nearby distances. And we're going to do this simply so it makes the modern DNA researchers have a convenient basis for their claims of, there's no way that they could have come from North America to Asia. They're saying they had to have come from Asia to North America, and that's how come we're related. But you will see that, of course, they're related into Asia, but it does fan out. There is an easternmost settlement in Russia, and that would be it's located near Cape Dezhnev. Yulin is the closest Russian settlement to the United States. And so when we're talking about migration happening from west to east, as is taught in school and generally a universally accepted, what we call a fact, there's two islands in the center of the strait, Little Diomede on the U.S. side and Big Diomede on the Russia side. That brings the distance of these two nations to only 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers apart at their closest point. Now, I doubt the people of those islands hundreds of years ago really expected that they would be considered to be in different countries. But I think it does show something about the travel. And, in Alaska, we would consider the Little Diomede part of our territory. And surely we would know about the people that were most likely related to them on the Russia side. Russia relocated their population from Big Diomede Island. But right now, Little Diomede has an indigenous Inupiat Eskimo population of 170, mostly in the city of Diomede. If there is not a lot of debate over the fact that on both sides of the Bering Strait there's significant correlation between DNA, then why could it not be easy to believe that there are similarities between Asia and America in both directions? The deeper you go into Asia, away from Alaska, the less the strength of the correlation of the DNA. So might this be strong evidence to suggest the reverse migratory pattern, perhaps from America to Asia, as much as any other theory that's been put out there? There is significant proven history of long-established inhabitation between the closest points between the two continents. They would have a history of fishing and fish trade in that area. This has been true over the centuries. They could have taken their boats less than a day's travel away. And so they have an event, and they would have routine visits, seasonal travels, and substantial trade. Why is the question of indigenous peoples of the area crossing between continents not a question people are asking when we're talking about this DNA proof that keeps coming up? It apparently proves that the relationship between Asia and America is cut and dried, as the research claim. A flicker of light of the knowledge from Joseph Smith's time still remains. So we're talking about the best theory is what I've explained, that these people over the centuries would have fanned out from America, and of course they're related to the people across the waters, across the Pacific Ocean, into Asia. Another premise of DNA research you must believe is that current identified DNA samples by race have not had significant changes since the time of the scriptures. That over the millenniums, races of people were isolated enough from each other, despite living in near proximity to each other by locally situated provinces and countries, however that was defined. And we're going to rule out the effects of what happens to DNA through intermarriage in centuries past. We're trying to identify specific genetic markings, which there is some ability to do so. But how accurate it is when you have such an incomplete database and incomplete history to identify those racial characteristics of DNA from millenniums past. Now, having wrestled with these questions regarding modern DNA research throughout this presentation, this video, the question will have to be asked, is there really anything out there that disproves early church leaders who are anxious for the opportunity to convert the Indians and stress that the American Indians had to be converted before the foretold gathering of Israel? If there's anyone that wants to make a comment, please do so. It doesn't appear that anything the early church leaders have taught has had a serious challenge when you ask those questions that are natural in a research setting. Do you have the specific data? Do you have a complete data to identify DNA that has remained unchanged so that you can say this or these people, this person or these people in the Middle East have this as DNA? and then we have American DNA, and then we can compare that to Asian DNA. Well, there's relationships between all of them, and even the early colonists in America before the Mormon Church was established were finding links in the ruins that indicated there was an Israel presence in America, and that's another video we can talk about. Mormon apostle Orson Pratt stated, "We, meaning the Mormons, have forgotten the forlorn condition of the sons of Joseph, the American Indians. We have forgotten the predictions of the holy prophets among their fathers, who so earnestly prayed to the Most High for themselves, and their children to the latest generation, whose prayers have been recorded in eternity and preserved in the archives of heaven, to be answered upon the head of their posterity in the last days. We have forgotten these things and are dwelling at ease in Zion and neglecting the great redemption of Israel, meaning the Lamanites. We have learned something. We are in possession of knowledge concerning these sons of the forest. Shall we therefore dwell at ease and allow the Indians to remain in ignorance of the great truths that we are in possession of them? If so, woe be to these people," meaning the Mormons, "or any other people that are in charge of the sacred things committed to our charge, and who do not use them for the redemption of those that are unacquainted with this knowledge." This is a language that comes from the 1800s. Now, politically correct woke culture of today may find some issues that they want to drudge up on this. But this, you can see the intent of Orson Pratt is clearly to show concern for the indigenous people, as we would use these newer, more modern, accepted terms. And he is simply reprimanding the LDS Church for this, not at a higher priority to convert the descendants of the Lamanites to the amazing truths of their history and their promised blessings in the American continents. Let's continue what Orson Pratt said. "How do you think their fathers would feel to see their descendants without knowledge of God and their ancestors, and then turn and see a people in their midst in possession of the sacred records and prophecies of their fathers, and yet that people, so careless and so much at ease that they use scarcely any exertion to impart the heavenly knowledge to them, the Lamanites? And if we do not accomplish this work of bringing this knowledge to the Israelites, we shall be accounted as salt that has lost its savor, and therefore is no longer good for anything but to be trodden under the feet of Israel, for our enemies. Whoso will not extend the hand of mercy to help the Indians will go down and lose their influence with God and all good men." In this video, we've taken some time to attempt to answer questions that don't seem to be based on actual factual knowledge. There's some presumptions about DNA that we've not really even had discussions on, in the LDS Church, for example. So the question is, why are we allowing the DNA research, what we call DNA research findings, to be such a significant topic of discussion? Have we really asked those hard questions examining that research? And is there anything there that really actually disproves anything about the Mormon religion? Based on what was presented, we don't have enough information to use that DNA research to so-called discredit early church leaders. And there is nothing that disproves the Mormon religion. If there's information that has not been brought to our attention, please feel free to comment in our comment field, and you're encouraged to like and subscribe to the channel. Please click on the links and support us by purchasing the products.